This is our Community Preservation Committee meeting for Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021. We are meeting remotely, and so I will go through the drill of reading our script, if you will, for remotely conducted open meetings. I am Peter Pingatore, the chair of the CPC. I will call each of the members of the CPC by name and ask that you respond affirmatively in order to confirm that you can hear me and that we can hear you. I'll do the same with our staff. So Paul Albert.
Here.
Joe Barnes.
Here.
Artie Crocker.
Here.
Bob Dermody.
Here.
Laura Dorfman.
Here.
Chris Gersel.
Here.
Penny Kirk.
Here.
Rick Zimba.
Here.
And the chair is here. Karis Lustig.
Here.
And Kristen Wright.
Here.
We are conducting this meeting remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of the emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly, hold on for a minute, I have a little workaround on the freeze here. Okay. To have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of the public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Enabling public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment. For this meeting, we are meeting and convening by Zoom app as posted in our town's website, and which has our agenda on it. Please note the meeting is being recorded and it's also being live broadcast. So some attendees are participating by video conference. Please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and they take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All of your meeting materials have been provided ahead of time. I think that we can say that they've largely been provided through the town's website, and the public is encouraged to follow along and using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. We'll turn to our first agenda item, but before I do, here are some ground rules. You all are aware of them. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After the speaker concludes his or her remarks, I will go down the line alphabetically to each member of the committee, inviting each to by name to provide any comments, questions, or motions. So hold your hold your comments and questions until I call your name. Remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking, and remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name, or I'll call you. We want your name on the record. And remember that each of our votes will be roll call votes. Let's see. So now turning to our agenda. The first item is Chairman's updates. And I believe the update that I have for you is that pursuant to your directive at the conclusion of our meeting last, I believe it was on February 18th, if I'm correct, or thereabouts. I did draft correspondence to the select board, chair of the select board, Mo Handel, copying representatives of the Needham schools, including the superintendent of schools, the chair of the school committee, the finance committee, and our town manager, as well, of course, as Karis Lustig, and provide to the select board and all those parties the sense of the board that we came to concerning Emery Grover, both with respect to the design request that was in front of us for FY22 and the anticipated construction request that will be in front of us for FY23. That letter is in your meeting materials. I don't know that we need to discuss it any further. If we do, we can raise it when we discuss FY2201, which is when we provide liaison updates. Okay, so that's my only update. Finance update, Karis, I think we're still waiting on that, or why don't you fill us in? We're waiting for our finance update, right?
So we're drafting the warrant right now, so we will have a better idea if there's any adjustments or changes to what the requests are that might impact the financial statements. So that's what the finance director is waiting on before he finalizes his projections. I do think it would be useful to have an idea of the thinking of the committee tonight, as well as the buckets that we might be looking at, because that will impact the funding projections. There should be sufficient funds to fund all the projects, but that assumes some of the buckets that they're coming out of, primarily open space. If we end up increasing the amount of money that goes into the community housing bucket, it is possible that a few of the projects will need to come out of that open space bucket in order to meet the contribution, the 11% contribution requirement to that bucket, as we wouldn't be able to fund both the project and a full 11% contribution if we fully funded every CPC request that came to us. So that's why just getting a little bit of clarity on the thought process, not a vote, but just some clarity will be helpful in preparing that. And it's likely that we will have that. I don't know if we'll have the opportunity to discuss it on the 17th because our agenda is very full for the public hearing, but potentially able to discuss that at the following meeting on the 31st.
Okay, so so there are a couple of projects in particular that I think we could have a discussion about in terms of what our commitment is for funding in this cycle. But I think I didn't quite know that that was going to be how we were going to approach it, Karis. And in prior years, once we got the projects on the table, we did make some decisions about what fund buckets projects would come from. Open space, for example, we did use part of open space to fund some of the work related to the town common in a prior funding cycle. So, so I don't know that we really need to kind of lock that in tonight. That was one of those to use. Yeah, so that's kind of where we will, at a later time, we can finagle the bagel, so to speak. When we get to that point. So we have a hand up, and it is Rick Zambone. And so we'll take, so Rick, let's hear from you. And
Yeah,
so, okay.
Just, if I could, Mr. Chair, just a comment on when we do eventually get to allocating money. I believe this year we have around 1.3 million of free cash in our numbers, thereabouts. So typically, I believe what happens is, and someone can correct me, but we usually take money out of the more restricted fund first, which would be free cash, because in this particular case, anything we don't allocate out of free cash gets rolled in and you can't touch it until after July 31st. So we usually try and use free cash first, and with $1.3 million, there's going to be a lot of those projects that are going to go into free cash. So I'm not sure, depending upon what we approve or whatever, that amount of free cash, which is pretty significant this year, may make a difference.
Yes, and I just want to clarify. So the funding source and the bucket aren't necessarily the same. So for example, if we funded, let's say, for example, the Reservoir design project, and we declared that was coming out of the open space bucket, The funding can still come from free cash, but that meets our requirement to appropriate that amount of money to the bucket for open space. So yeah, they're just like last year when we prepared the articles for voting. The finance director and I have looked at the different articles and where the funding is available and how it could be allocated. So you're correct. The free cash and the general reserves are the areas that we're looking at for funding sources.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay. All right, so with that kind of guiding, with that kind of principle, which is let's have kind of a discussion about a sense of the board on basically each and every one of these as we roll through them. Understanding that we're still going through the process, we'll still be having our public hearing and our consultation with both the Finance Committee and the Select Board. To the degree that we can give our finance director some guidance, then it will help us in terms of what the financial model is that he gives us at when we finally do meet with him. Okay, and we'll do that all in the context of the liaison updates, and so we'll go through each of the proposals. Some of them are going to be very short and no discussion, and some of them will be a little more robust. That's what I anticipate. So let's start with FY 2201 Emery Grover renovations. First of all, I provided you with my update related to that. I don't know if the liaisons have any further comments. We'll start with them. Comments or questions or additional information.
I'll jump in first, Bob, if you want.
Go ahead.
No further information on the Emery Grover project, but I will say that I thought that your letter reflected very clearly not only the meeting we had, but also the sense of where we were going as a committee with the funding of Emery Grover. So I thought it was well said, and I don't think there's any misinterpretation that could come out of that by the readers of your letter. So I agree wholeheartedly with what you've sent to Mo Handel.
Okay. Bob Dermody.
I concur. I have no new updates. Just very interested for us to work hard to figure out a way to fund it in some fashion.
Okay. And now let's open it up to the committee. Any comments, questions, or motions with respect to 01? And we'll go in alphabetical order. Paul Alpert.
No, nothing from me, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Artie Crocker.
No.
Okay. Laura Dorfman.
No, thank you.
Okay. Chris Gersel.
Nothing at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Penny Kirk. Okay. Penny. Okay. And Rick Zinbo.
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, good. Let's go on to, and I have no comments. And thank you, Joe, for your comment about the letter. 2202, preservation of Town of Needham marriage records. That is my responsibility. I don't have anything to add. And I think that we've kind of given this a good look over, and it's not a huge amount of money. Comments, let's just do it open season, if you will, to quote Dr. Fauci, but it's not April 1 yet. Any comments or questions or motions? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to FY 2204, Town Common Historic Redesign and Beautification. That is, now I'm stretching my memory. That's Chris.
Yep.
Thank you, Chris.
Bob, do you have any updates at all?
No, not at this time.
I have none either. I know that there were some questions at the beginning of, I think someone asked about the police chief and the fire chief to see about, the common in regards to like a traffic pattern. That I think that question was answered, but I think the presentation that Ed Olson did was very self-explanatory and answered all questions that people might have.
Okay, so 2204, Paul Alpert.
Yeah, there was something that happened at the planning board meeting last night that just leads me to a question. Refresh my memory. Are we funding design funds or are we funding the entire project here now?
This is construction.
This is construction, yeah.
Construction. At the planning board meeting last night, we had a petition for the renewal of the farmer's market, which runs from June until Thanksgiving. And as part of their presentation, they told us that they were told by DPW that they would not be doing any work on the common this year. I didn't say anything, but I found that interesting. If we're going to fund this at Maytown meeting, why aren't they starting construction? When are they starting construction?
Great question. Karis, can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, so I can explain. And a part of it has to do with our funding process for town meeting and how that impacts the actual construction season. So the items that we end up voting at town meeting, there's a 21-day period that we are not able to move forward on the project because someone could lodge an appeal of the town meeting process. So that usually carries us into the middle of June when we could actually start doing a project. And by that, I mean, that's when we can sign a contract with a construction company so they can dig in so they can start ordering their supplies and everything else. Basically what this ends up meaning is it is very difficult to construct a large scale project in one construction season if you spend the funds the exact year that they're appropriated. So in this particular case, there's also the added factor of the fact that the businesses are really dependent on having their outdoor dining in the town common. The reason that we decided though to still pursue funding this year and not postpone it a year is that getting funding in May enables us to put a bid out in the early winter. We tend to get much better prices on projects when we put them out in the winter than when we put them out in the spring, because there's more competition and people are trying to fill up their summer construction season. And the goal would be to start construction when the winter breaks in 2022. So we wouldn't have another opportunity to get funding before, April of 2022. So that's why we're still seeking funding. But the farmer's market is correct that there is not an intention to break ground this season. That being said, if there's an open winter or COVID goes away and the businesses are no longer dependent on the town common, that would be part of the conversation, but I don't think that that's a realistic, it's not what we're seeing as likely to happen. We think that the construction will start as soon as the winter breaks in 2022.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, great question. This is one of those projects that could be funded by open space. And so I think that one of the principles that I think that Paul and I did that, or Paul, Albert and I vaguely remember us meeting with our finance director in years past. And about the allocation of the buckets, we made it kind of late in the season. But one of the principles that we held on to was this: we have this general principle that we try to keep $1 million in the open space bucket as kind of a reserve so that we can move quickly in case open space becomes available for acquisition. And so that's kind of what the funding level is that we want to keep and maintain. But we're really one of those communities that doesn't have a lot of opportunity to acquire open space. That's why the amendment to CPA was helpful to us, and it resulted in us devoting a substantial amount of resources to Park and Rec. So I think one of the principles we may want to hold on to if we do this as a group, in order for us to address this at a later date, is to hold on to that principle that after funding, we want to be up and over $1 million, but not by a lot in open space. Chris, you got to unmute. Chris.
Sorry, rookie move. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't this project also qualify for historic because the town common is considered historic? Because I remember one of the write-ups that it was part of the town hall, which also covers the town common, so it could also fall into the historic bucket.
So there is no money in the historic bucket. So that's kind of an academic question. But yes, or Karis, I mean,
I would just say that it's also the bucket, even things that come out of the general and free cash also have to have a bucket. I don't know the exact number that we're gonna be allocating for the 11%, but I imagine it's around $350,000 based on what we allocated last year. So as long as we exceed $350,000 with the designation of open space, we'll have met that 11% contribution minimum without deducting anything from the existing open space bucket. But we could also deduct from the open space bucket as well.
Right. Open space bucket, what's our current balance? Rick Zambone, current balance.
Hang on a sec. Based on the most recent information that Dave gave me, I don't know if it's correct or not, though. We have 600 and, no, a million six.
$1,600,000. Okay.
I don't know if that's the most up-to-date number, but that's the one I have in front of me, so.
So that means, so if we don't draw down from that, we're gonna end up with about $2 million in that bucket. I mean, we can discuss that as a committee. It probably doesn't make sense to just have the money sit there with no future anticipated use, earning, 0.01%. As opposed to some of the other buckets where we're trying to treat them as a savings account or with some aspirational use in the future. So that's something to consider. Okay, can we hold that? Can we kind of agree that that's kind of a finance principle that we'll play around with when we get down to the granular details of what bucket money comes out of, funding comes out of? Yes, Bob Dermy.
Yes, I agree with that. Quick question. Why, I think I understand, but why the need for speed to get access money to buy something? Doesn't it always have to go through the cycle of every other project and town meeting, et cetera?
All right, so this is relating back to Karis's earlier statement.
Oh, my
Is it?
apologies.
No, it's fine.
No, I think you're asking a separate question, which
Oh,
is
you are?
why
Okay.
do we need to have money put in reserve ready to buy a piece of property?
Oh, that's what you're asking.
Just specifically the speed, not the
Okay.
amount of the money, but why the need for speed? Because I don't think we have much control over that.
I think it's speed in municipal sense as opposed to speed in real sense, in that we always put in our own application to purchase property should something come up.
Okay.
And I would say, like, we were talking about another parcel, and that's probably like a 3 or 6 month process. But as far as a municipal budgeting cycle goes, we're usually, 18 months out. So doing something
Okay.
in 6 months, having that available, I think is the benefit.
Right, so
I also like the term municipal speed.
Yeah, so you have $1 million isn't going to go very far, but if you have $1 million, sitting around, and then you could
Down
fund it
payment.
with the other slug that comes in on the next funding cycle, which would be
Okay.
$400,000, you're at 1.4.
Thanks for the
Then-
clarification.
Okay.
May I make a comment, Mr.
Sure.
Chair, as a former member of the Conservation Commission? If a piece of property were to become available for purchase for conservation land, the speed would be that the seller of that land might very well want to say, yeah, I'm willing to sell it to you, but if you're not going to buy it, I'm putting it on the open market, and I need a purchase and sale agreement in a very short period of time, which would require a deposit of usually like 5 to 10% of the purchase price. And so by having the money in the bucket, that's the speed that the Conservation Commission is really concerned with, is having funds available to be able to sign a purchase and sale agreement and fund the deposit pretty much on a dime.
Okay, so then I have a question for you, Paul, which is, do you think the number of $1 million and a little north of $1 million is adequate for that reserve for those purposes?
I haven't been on the Conservation Commission for 5 years. In fact, I was thinking before we started this discussion of asking Artie to go back to the Conservation Commission and ask at their next meeting and maybe ask them what they think about how much, whether the commission thinks that $1 million in reserve is sufficient.
I'll ask my meeting. I mean, certainly $1 million is plenty of money for deposits going on. I mean, there's not an issue there. would it be enough money to buy any piece of property? It would probably have to be a fairly small piece of property when it comes to this type of thing, because usually it's a property of a little bit more substantial size. And, you know, will it be a half acre, an acre, and those pieces of that property could go for certainly more than $1 million. I can easily imagine that.
I would like some feedback from
Hmm.
the Conservation Commission as a whole.
I'll bring it up the next meeting.
Thank
All
you.
right, good. That will be helpful. All right. And our sense, I guess the sense of the committee in terms of this funding on this project and the success of this, whether or not you're supportive of it, do we have anyone who's a serious opponent or detractor on this proposal? Okay, we have hearing none. Let's move on to Fisher Street Trailhead. And that's the Needham Rail Trail, 2205. Again, I apologize. Oh, I think I apologize, but I cannot recall who's responsible for this.
I am.
Sorry, Artie. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly no updates. I mean, I think we realize this is about as simple as you can get. There's no updates.
Right, and it's a relatively small amount. It's the same amount that we allocated last year, which we didn't use. It's getting returned. We're going to repurpose it.
Yeah, I think
And
this
I'm doing it.
is fairly cut and dry.
It's cut and dried. Okay, good. 2206 resurface synthetic track at DeFazio.
That's
That is Paul and Penny's project, I believe.
no,
Or is
it's
it Paul?
Paul and Laura's project.
Paul and Laura, sorry, Laura.
I have no updates unless Laura has something new. We're just expecting Ted Olson to pretty much give us the same presentation as he did last year.
Okay. All right. A sense of the committee, any detractors or opponents in terms of funding the full amount requested? Laura Dorfman. Question.
Paul, thank you. Did we talk at all about getting updated, any updated pricing or information? Or maybe Chris, do you remember from the vendor who was going to do it? It was that, can't remember, the company down the Cape.
Cape and
Did
Island.
we?
Cape and Island.
Cape and Island, yes.
Mhm.
I can't
I know
remember
that
whether we did. Or
They came back out again just to kind of, because the original one they did was back in 2019. So
Right.
they did come back out again to see what it's like. And of course it didn't improve. So I think they
Yeah.
did get a more recent estimate and update of, where the track is. And I bet you
And the-
Karis has that ready.
The amount wasn't significantly different though, right?
No, but yeah, it was an uptick, from the original one, but yes, it was an increase.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And good question, Laura. Any additional?
Yes, we did have an email that was distributed from December 29th. Indicating. Wait, nope, that's a different letter. I will double check with Ed Olson on just some sort of written confirmation.
Okay. That's more of a housekeeping item, but I don't think that he's gonna lose any votes if there's an uptick in the price. Would you say that? Would you agree with that, Laura? Yes.
I do, and I also recall vaguely that there was an increase, but it was just really nothing substantial. And I just can't remember the numbers, and I know I have it somewhere, but I can't find it.
6,000 was the increase.
I'm sorry?
The increase was 6,000. I'm sorry, Peter.
Ah, thanks, Kristen.
Nice work.
Okay.
Okay,
Peter,
good. Yes, Bob Dermody,
may I ask you a quick question about the track?
absolutely.
So I don't know if you saw on social media the other day, but there was a DPW truck driving on the track. Is that accepted practice?
Kristen, all you.
All right, Kristen Wright.
The post from social media was from the Park and Recreation Department because they were repairing the overhead lighting on the track. They are a specialized company that takes very, very good care of the products that they're putting on the track. Ed Olson was involved. And they'll be on the track again, finishing the repair in the coming weeks.
Thank you.
Okay. we will conclude 2206. We'll move on to FY 2207, McLeod Field renovation.
Come on, mute.
Okay, so, yeah, so we have, I guess I'll
Did I get it
refer
right? What are we laughing about? All right,
the kitty cat.
okay.
We should, we could all look like that lawyer that was looking like a kitty cat when he was in court or something like that on the Zoom call. In any case, yeah, so, so on McLeod Field. So let's call it an update, if you will, on the proposal that was given. I think we all remember in Ed's presentation, there was a lot of emphasis put on the damage being done to the field with the drainage pipe under it when it springs a leak. And he was talking about some other amenities on the field and so forth, and some work that needed to be done in the field because drainage wasn't good anyway. So I think a lot of us, myself included, and Ed as well, our minds were stuck on the drainage problem and fixing the drainage pipe. And how is this money being used, and what money, and we're having design money, and why are we putting design money onto a drainage pipe, and so forth and so on. I've talked to Ed. I've given it some more thought, and what it sounds like is what's going on is this. We all know when a field has to be designed, you know, it's going to cost us 30 to 50 grand to 60 grand for the design for the design of that field. We know that's going to happen. It's standard money. I think it's a lot, but that's the way it is. It's going to cost us that much money. What's happening, what appears to be happening here is we're having a field being designed, but at the same time, there's some crossover of work that's going to be done, or what some of the engineers or the company doing design, when they come to some of our meetings, the conservation meeting, for example, when they come, well, instead of coming for two different projects for two different times, they're coming once, because they're doing the drainage pipe in the field at the same time. So in fact, what's happening is it's more like there's a design going on for the field for, let's say, $45,000, and for an extra $5 grand, give or take, they're throwing in the drainage pipe. I'm paraphrasing, to say the least, but that's what seems like is really going on. So if Ed came and said, this field really needs a lot of work, and here's the amenities we have to do, and it's in rough shape, you know, and he said, I don't have to do anything in the drainage pipe. It's just in really rough shape, but there is some drainage problems, and it's going to cost $45,000. Would we hesitate? Not likely. And so I'm kind of changing my stance on this one myself, where you may have to think about how we word it, but I am now completely on board that this field has to be taken care of, and I think it completely falls on the CPC fund responsibility of us, allowance for us to fund it. And that cost of 45 grand is normal for doing a field.
Okay, so what Artie's done in summary fashion is kind of, he's taken our expressed concerns over the last couple of meetings about the scope of the project and how neatly it does or does not fit within CPC or what our past use of CPC funds with respect to open space and recreation. And he's given us a summary answer and response. So what I think I'd like to do is, with respect to these, there are probably four out of the next five. We'll probably want to have a discussion, and I probably want to get everyone's input. So I think at this point, what we'll do is we'll go in alphabetical order, and I'll call on each of you. If you have comments, questions, or motions, then we'll entertain them. Okay, and so I'm going to begin with Paul Alpert. Paul Alpert.
Nothing, thank you.
Joe Barnes.
Not for this particular project, but one that may relate to this coming up in the next two or three. So I'll hold off.
Okay, the town moderator would admonish you for doing that. You know, you can only talk about what's in front of you. All right, Joe. Right. I'm just joking. Okay. Okay, Artie, we've heard from you. Bob Dermody. No hats in the meeting room.
My apologies, Mr. Moderator. But we're not in town hall. So Artie, thanks for that clarification. I'm starting to think differently about it maybe, but are we hearing that it makes sense to do it all at once? Is that kind of the idea?
Oh, well, I think without there's no question about that.
Then can we just stipulate that our money goes to the field and not to the pipe?
I don't,
No, well, we could address that in a way, we could back out some of the money too. We can do
yeah,
that.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
we are gonna back out some of the money that
Proportional, sounds
according
good.
to the design company, this is how much is being allocated for this part of it.
Good, thank you.
All right, so we can address that issue. Karis.
So I think I sent the email that we received from the one of our engineering firms that indicated that it's about $3,000 for the drainage work.
Right. All right. And well, actually, let's do the math now, because it seems like just to clarify, it seems like the design fee is $48,000. 3,000 of it, they estimated, goes to the drain. I have that right? No, they don't have it wrong. Okay.
Well, what is right then? If that's wrong, what is right?
So it's $45,000 total, 3,000 of which would go to the drain. So if we were to amend it to not include the drain, we would amend it to $42,000.
I thought I saw.
No, Karis,
Twice.
the lump sum fee at page 3 from the T&B correspondence has a number of $49,000.
Okay.
So let's get some clarity on that, but I think it's now we can just, well, actually, let's stay with that. Is it okay if I jump in line and just stay with that for a minute? So let's go to page 3 of the fees for consulting. And in it, for everyone's information, at page 2, this is from Ty and Bond, page 2, first full paragraph, second sentence, they say, as part of the drainage design, we will evaluate the condition of the 48-inch pipe and make improvements to the drain line as necessary. And then for the fees, if you look at the fees, I'll tell you this, I did not do the math, but they said that the sum of those figures is $49,000. I think we could do it quickly.
Yeah, the sum is 49, is 35 plus 8 plus 6.
There you go, you got it. So it's 49. Now, is anyone skilled enough to know that there's any of those, the phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, any of those jump out at you as something specifically related to the pipe? Anyone, on our collective knowledge? Anyone on the committee?
No, I don't have the knowledge, but in the email, it says it's estimated that $3,000 would be for the drain portion of the pipe.
So that puts the request neatly at, their request is $45,000. So isn't the funding request $45,000? And the Ty and Bond says the cost is 49. So we may have, the point being that we may have already arrived at the backing out of the figure. Bob Dermody.
Yes, I'm trying to catch up to you on page 3 of the Ty and Bond document, Needham Baseball. Lump sum fee 49,000. And where do they back out the 3? Or where do they?
A separate email.
Oh, an email?
Yes.
Not an attachment. Okay, sorry.
It's at the bottom of the email.
Okay.
Karis's second email
All right,
with
thank you.
more items. I
guess
could forward it to you.
No, I got it. My question, I want to read it, but I want to see what the wording is. Do they just say for the pipe itself, for the design of the pipe, for the installation of the pipe, for the construction administration on the pipe, you know, all the other associated things?
This
'cause
is
I
just
think-
for design.
Okay, so, and this whole project is just for design then, right?
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, that's all.
All right, I'm going to have some further questions when we get to me, if that's okay. And then just another subset of questions, but I want to stay as best we can, stay in order. So, all right, so we've heard from Bob Dermody and Laura Dorfman. Further questions?
So this is a little bit off topic, but it's a placeholder. It would be really helpful, especially where we're remote, if in the agenda, we could have the amount requested next to it and possibly the bucket, because I am toggling back and forth between 2 computers to find the requests and the amounts, and then looking in the emails. You follow me? And I just want to know what I'm talking about, and it's just hard this way.
Yep.
I just think it's a COVID challenge and we're all electronic, and Karis and Kristen, I don't want to give you extra work to do, I don't know how the rest of you feel, but if it said 45,000, open space, and all of them had the notation next to it, it would just be super helpful. I have 2 computers here trying to find all this information because I don't want to print out 100 documents. I don't even have a printer at home that does that, and I don't want to do it at work. So
yeah.
that's my only comment. I know it's not relevant, but to this, but so if we could consider that.
All right. All right, duly noted. All right, so that's it. No comments with respect to our, the present article, correct? Okay. Crystal.
No real comments at this time. The only thing is, Artie, I thought that was a great breakdown of explaining of, we all had one idea thought in our mind of what it was and how it's now changed to actually answer those questions that we came up. I thought that was a great description of how the conversation went with you and Ed. So thank you very much for clarifying that. But in regards to the project, no real other questions at this time.
Okay, Penny Kirk.
I thought Artie did a great job explaining, and I have no further questions.
Okay, and Mr. Zimbo.
Yeah, I have 2 or 3 different questions. And I'm going to refer to the document that we were just talking about. It says in there that there are certain aspects that this particular proposal covers. One of which is that it doesn't cover is a survey and the wetlands. And it says in there, I believe it says that it's going to be done by the town. So that's not part of this project, correct? That's not part of the funding request? That's number one. And number 2 is, it also talks about, they actually have to do a pipe inspection as we're going through this to determine if the pipe needs to be replaced or there's some much larger problems with respect to the pipe. And my concern is that we don't know, I don't believe we know, maybe we do, whether this particular pipe that's under the plowed field is going to be, if it comes up with a problem, then I would think that complicates this whole process more. As far as bidding the job, the scope of the work, it's not just as outlined here. And I'm a little hesitant to throw support on this because to me it seems there's just too many uncertainties out there. And what I don't want to see happen is a $45,000 project turn into a $450,000 project. So I don't know how we handle that.
Are you referring in some ways, Rick, are you mainly referring to the additional cost of actual construction versus design, for example, or something like this? Because I understand what you're talking about, but I mean, with that type of figure jump, is that more the additional construction cost you're thinking of ahead?
Well, no, I mean, I'm looking at phase 2 construction documents, $35,000. It's the bulk of the request.
Mhm.
And to put construction documents together, at least it's been a number of years since I was involved in doing that type of work, but putting construction documents together to just do the scope of work that's outlined here is one thing. Putting construction documents together, if you have to replace or relocate that pipe, is a totally different set of documents, I would think. I mean, I'm trying to keep my hands around the scope of the project, and I push it in on the left and it pops out on the right. And I'm not sure, maybe it's me. I don't know.
Well, what I said to Ed today was that, we all know that if these were completely separate items, that the field would cost X, 45,000, whatever it is. But for some company to come in and actually evaluate and give us design of what has to be done to that drainage pipe would be completely different. I mean, it's certainly not going to be $3,000, maybe 30, 50, 20, who knows, but it would be a lot more money than what's going on here. Now, what wasn't going through my head was the fact that what they are outlining here for the amount of effort that they are going to place on this, is it enough? Is it actually enough to do the adequate job of designing this pipe, which may in fact have to be completely replaced under that field from one point A to one point B, which is outside, before the field and after the field? Good point. I don't know.
So can I kind of reframe the question? And this will kind of fold in my concerns as well. So I keep going back to the application. And so I have a couple of questions about the application. What is the document that gets printed on the town warrant? What paragraph from the application is printed on the town warrant?
One that,
Paragraph 9. Is paragraph 9?
it's a combination, so we do write, and I'll be sending that out for review shortly, article descriptions. One of the things on this particular project, I actually, in trying to work on the article information, put a call into Ed Olson. I'm hoping to talk to him tomorrow to provide more clarity, as the application really highlights the drainage aspect of the project and really doesn't talk very much about the subsurface and surface work that Ed is doing.
Right. Well, so there are two things about that. One is it doesn't do anything but address the drainage. So it says this funding is for the design to look at the most appropriate method to address the 4-inch drain and the subsurface that has been eroded. And the condition preceding it to make its application are the hazardous sinkholes that are created by the leaky pipe. And then Ed made a presentation to us which said the pipe leaks. Hold on, I'm frozen, but can you still hear me?
We can still hear you.
That's okay, good. And he made a presentation that it says this is to examine what we can do with the pipe, and to kind of recast Rick's question is, okay, so we appropriate $45,000. The first thing they do is dig a trench and they look at the pipe and they make a determination that the pipe isn't in the right spot. Actually, it should be moved out to Great Plain Avenue or rerouted or something else. Is this $45,000 going to end up being paid for that? Or are they going to close it up, close up the body, come back to us and tell us we have to do a different operation? Because it sounds a little bit to me like I don't really want us to be in a position where we fund $45,000, which is essentially to open up the trench, examine what's wrong with the pipe, and pretty soon the pipe is no longer under McLeod Field. It's being designed to go somewhere else, which Ed actually said was a possibility. And we've spent CPC money for that. I don't think that we should be doing that. And then we run into the kind of field, we'll run into the kind of opposition that we ran into in the past from the floor of town meeting. So I just want us to get some clarification, because we have an application and a presentation, which doesn't match up with the tie and bond proposal. That's my question. And can anyone respond to that, or do we just need additional information? Laura Dorfman.
The proposal states it's for design work. The tie-in bond, I think the issue is the tie-in bond proposal talks about work done, assuming design work's been done. And I think that's the mismatch.
No, I don't. Well, maybe, but I don't read it that way.
No, I mean, Peter, you're right that the proposal to us is worded in such a way where it's greatly emphasizing the drainage. But I can appreciate why it was phrased that way, simply because of the effect the field is in and the danger that the field that is presenting to the field. But it doesn't change the fact that the field, even without that, the field needs a lot of work in this design is necessary. So the problem is that, as you said, it's not phrased correctly for bringing to town meeting to have CPC money being spent on it, but it needs to be done. So the question is, that has to be fixed. The other question is Rick raised is that the fact that, okay, we're spending money on this. Now, I don't see a problem having this money that we're allocating to it actually being spent on the field, on the redesign of the actual playing field itself and the amenities. I can see that going on. What Rick is saying though is that when it comes to this, that $3,000 or $4,000 that's being that the design companies that they're going to break off for this really probably isn't going to cover this. So in fact, the town is actually going to have to fit the bill for the rest of this because the CPC isn't funding it anyway. So what's going to happen at that point is that's probably not going to be enough to actually adequately address what needs to be done. I can see that happening actually. So
Okay, Chris,
Just one thing that I'm noticing, and I think where it is where some confusion is lying is in the terminology that we see on the application and what we see with tie-in bond. That the way I'm
Right.
reading it, if you're going on page 1 into page 2, where it says, we have assumed that the drainage will connect to the existing 48-inch drain under the existing baseball field. As part of the drainage design, this is just the drainage of the field, not the drainage pipe. That whenever the water comes off the field, it has to drain somewhere and drains into that pipe. So they're talking about the drainage of the field leading into that pipe. They are not redesigning where this pipe is going to. That is going to be done by an outside source. Tie-in bond is not going to come in and dig up a huge trench of the 45,000 to look at this pipe. The 45,000 is for the whole scope of the design fund of the whole field.
But they can't do anything with the field until they address the pipe.
Right, and that's why they're doing it together, and that's why it's going to be by a subcontractor that's going to come in and have that whatever robot
Well,
or
the
something like that
subcontractor's
to
just
look
gonna
at the
actually put a camera in the pipe.
Right, exactly, but they're not
That's-
going to dig up a
that-
huge trench.
I know,
You
but
know,
that's
to do-
$1,500. That's
Right,
a
but I mean,
camera.
listen, I wish I was in that industry, but I'm not. That's what the cost is of doing it. But the whole fund is not going towards just that pipe. It is to the whole amenity of everything that can be done at the field.
Okay, I just have a problem with the application not matching up with what we're voting. I mean, and I have the same comment with respect to the town reservoir. It's like the application and the information behind it don't match up. And I don't understand, that it causes confusion on my part and concern, overall concern. And I also wonder, as I said, what is it that we ends up getting printed on the town warrant, and can we change it? And we've gone through processes before where we've had to amend these applications, right? We forced proponents to go through an amendment process.
I think you're right, Peter. We have to. We have no choice. We can't have. I mean, not only does it not match, it doesn't match up to actually what Ed is looking for us to fund. Actually, it doesn't.
I also, but the other thing too is that Ed came before us, told us what the problem was with the pipe, told us that the design work was going to be to figure out what to do with the pipe. It sounded like a really important thing to me. It sounded like something that didn't really fit neatly within CPC, but it sounded important. So
Ed made a mistake. Ed made a mistake, and he even says it. He made a mistake of how he was talking about the project, and I believe the reason why he made a mistake was because he has been fighting this issue for 10 years, give or take, whatever length of time. I think it's been 10 years now, fighting that issue with that drainage pipe causing sinkholes in the field, and some of them right now they're pretty big. So his brain was stuck on that, not stuck on the fact that the field actually has to have a redesign with some amenities, and he's coming to us for that.
all right.
I think that's what's going
All
on.
right, I think we're kind of at a point where we can, I think I have a proposal on how to go forward, but Rick, any other comments? Rick?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just think, and I'm trying to get this, this stuff back in a bag. If I look at it, it's a multi-step process. Number one is they have to put the camera down the pipe to see, what's the inside condition of the pipe. They do that. They have to dig up the pipe if there's a problem. We could do all these amenities. It's a sequencing. We could be doing all these amenities and then have to dig the thing back up again because they now have to replace the pipe or relocate it or something. I mean, it's almost like I understand the design of the fence and the walkway and the regrading and the drainage, okay? But it seems to me, if you want to do this project in various phases, the first phase is to identify and correct the cause of the problem. Phase 2 is to come to us for the design money and the project costs to do the final ultimate fix of this. But before we should step into this muck of McLeod Field, we need to know that the root cause of this has been taken care of.
Okay. All right.
That's my point.
All right. That's a good point, but we're guessing a little bit too.
No,
No, but you're right, but you're guessing a little bit. And so I think what I would say is, what we should do with this project is Ed is going to be making a presentation right at our public hearing. Maybe he can answer. I think he knows generally what the questions are, which is, hey, what about the pipe? Is it going to be relocated? Who's going to pay for that? What's the sequence? Are you asking for design funds that we're actually going to end up sitting on because you're going to fund this other aspect of the pipe from some other source? What happens if there's a determination that the pipe has to be moved? How does that? We CPC, I think as a principle, don't want to pay for that, the design work or the installation work related to that. But those are all questions that that he could answer when we next meet, and he could provide answers to us before then. But as it is now, I think the sense of the committee is, look, we're generally supportive, but we've got some questions here. Depending on how the answers come in, we may not have a lot of support for the proposal. Paul, but I don't want to jump on it. Paul Alpert.
I'm going in a totally different direction, Peter.
Okay.
I'm going back to what Artie said at the beginning of the discussion, which is that Ed is telling Artie that the major portion, 90%, more than 90% of the design funds is for the design of the field. Sounds to me like once the pipe issue has been resolved, we're going to spend $45,000 to get a design for regrading the field, for drainage of the field, for all the issues that deal with the field. And on top of that, there's going to be a couple of $1,000, $3,000 that's going to be part of that will go to looking at the pipe, because we can do that at the same time that we're doing the design here. We're getting into a discussion of the project, not the design. Rick's objection is that the project is going to be, a major portion of it is going to be the movement of the pipe or the relocation of the pipe or fixing the pipe. And I agree, when we come to the project, we shouldn't pay for the pipe, we should pay for the field. But this is just the design funds. And I'm saying that if what Artie said at the beginning is true, that it's only a small fraction of the design funds that's going to go to looking at the pipe, and the major portion of the design funds is going to the field, I'm fine with funding it, because I don't want to get into a discussion on design funds that it's going to be $42,737.62 that's going to go to the field, and it's going to be $3,282.97 that's going to go to the pipe. And so we're not going to pay for that, to the 97 cents. We're funding a round number, a small portion of which is going to the pipe purely for design. Once we've got the design, once they come to us and tell us what actual work they're going to do, then we break it down and say, we're not paying for the pipe, we're paying for the field on the project. I'm fine with funding the design funds if Ed comes to us at the public meeting and makes it clear that the vast majority of the funds is for the design of the field.
Well, that last sentence I agree with as well. I mean, so that's fine. I mean, but there may be a question of sequencing of the project, but sure.
Well, I
mean,
mean,
we need answers.
I mean,
But can I,
Peter, there's sequencing of the construction of the project, but there doesn't have to be necessarily sequencing of the design of the project. Those are two different things. We certainly don't want it designed to then have that implement that design until the pipe is fixed. Completely valid point. But the main thing that we have to fix is what's going to be brought to town meeting. That's the main thing we have to fix, period. I think that's all we have to care about right now, in all honesty.
well, and we also just want confirmation that this is right, that what Ed is proposing is what is in the tie and bond proposal, and that's what we're funding. Okay, that's all. But, and if I don't mean to put you on the spot, Karis, but can you offer any insight into this as well? I mean, we've had Artie and Chris, you know, basically they're say what Ed has told them, and it makes logical sense, but there's still some hesitation by at least two members of the committee. So if you could, if you have any additional insight to offer, I think we would welcome that.
I think the majority of the work that Ed is actually going to be designing is similar to work that we've done for other field renovations in town, similar to what we just did at Claxton. What I think is the added complication and why that became the focus of the application is the sensitive nature of the fact that this field was recently renovated. So it's not a field that's been sitting for 20, 30 years like some of the other fields we've done. And that there is a specific reason as to why it needs to be addressed prematurely. So I think the focus of the application being on the drainage is really to discuss the premature need to address this field. And that's where the focus ended up going for the entire application. So I do think that there was a complacency on our part in not addressing, you know, the scope in order of priority. But I think it was really to address the concerns, particularly people who, you know, donated to that project or participated in that project, that this was a unique situation because of that drainage component.
Yeah, so actually that was one of my other questions, which was this was a relatively recently renovated field, right? 2008. Is that right? Okay, so we're going to get some questions.
And it wasn't done correctly. It wasn't.
We're going to get some questions about that at town meeting. So, okay, so in order, alphabetical, Bob, because I didn't see whose hand went up first.
I think it was Mr. Zambones, if he'll let me go quickly. Thanks. Yeah, I'd also be concerned at town meeting if it's a well-known fact that this has been a problem for 10 plus years, according to Artie. Now, is that a fact? Is that generalization? That concerns me as well, that no offense, Karis, but it was something I wish, you know, the town had taken care of already. So maybe a town meeting member, I am one, could ask a question of, you know, where is this in the DPW's budget, irrespective of what's on top of it. It's a drain the town owns and theoretically needs to maintain. Just why did it take this long? So that's more of a rhetorical question that we may face at town hall, at town meeting kind of thing. Thanks.
Okay, if you is that a question that you were it's strictly rhetorical, or is there a request for information from Karis on that?
I would, if she wants to respond, great. If she says no, I'm happy to.
I'll bring that question to Ed for more clarity. Again, I've only been the interim director for a short period, but I do know we fixed it as an as-needed basis, and we've done some temporary measures.
Okay.
I think that they just didn't resolve the issue. So, but Ed can certainly provide a clear history from when he started 11 years ago and what he's seen in his 11-year history.
Yeah, what Ed told me was that when he started here, literally a week, give or take a week after he was here, and the problem started before that, this field had a sinkhole in it because of this pipe. It would have a sinkhole, the sinkhole would be fixed, the pipe would be fixed, a hole would occur in another location because the pipe would break in another location because of deficiencies. So it's been going on for a while. More than 11 years, 10 years, I'm not sure, but it's at least this long.
Thank you, Karis, and you're doing a great job.
Okay, Rick Zimbo.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to defer to Laura. She had her hand, she was waving.
Oh, I'm sorry, Laura. Laura Dorfman.
No, it's okay. I'm sorry, but I have to go back to my earlier point that for me, the problem is that the request doesn't match this proposal. The request says that he is looking for design funds, funding for design work to look at the most appropriate method to address the 4-inch drain. And the subsurface has been eroded. The tie-in bond proposal says, we will design plans for rehabilitation of the new field. Those two don't match and one has to be adjusted or it's not going to make any sense to somebody. And that's all I have to say.
Okay. Is there any, okay, oh, never mind. All right, Rick Zimbo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I understand the scope now that we've talked about it. You know, it's for the design of the field and the modifications to the field. And I have no problem with that. And my problem ties a little bit into where Laura was going. And it also, more importantly, and I don't really need, as long as it's explained to us, I don't think we need to modify the application. What's much more important is that we get the request right on town meeting floor in the warrant and in the explanation of the warrant article. And that leads to Bob's point, is I think it's important for Ed, when he comes before us or before the public hearing, to explain that we have the money in this capital plan or in this operating expense, and we're going to use that to resolve the underlying root cause of the situation. Once that's done, then we're going to go ahead and do all these different things to McLeod Field, including the fence, including the walkway, all of that other stuff, the drainage. And that's our responsibility. The rest of it's not. And so that's why I think it's important.
All right, that leads to what my comment was going to be, which is if you look at our projected, our financial projections, the latest iteration being, I think, September 14th of 2020, there is an FY22 expenditure of $45,000 for design funds for McLeod Field. And then FY23 shows construction funds. This is all being drawn from CPC funds, anticipated CPC application of $450,000. So now what we can do, if you want to think about this as a committee, is we can approach this right now with the way we approached Emery Grover, which is we don't know what's in that 450, what they anticipate spending the 450 on, but we're not inclined. The question would be, are we inclined to fund any subsurface repairs? And if the 450 is a guesstimate of both subsurface repairs and all other repairs that, you know, around what you would normally do for a field, we're inclined to fund that. But it may be useful for the town in terms of planning to say, you know, we're not, if it's relocating the pipe, if it's putting in a new pipe, if that's part of the 450, I don't want to be a committee, I'm not a juror of one, but it may be helpful for us. We could actually send that signal if that makes sense to us. But it's a similar exercise that we went through with Emery Grover. Does that make sense? You understand my point, Karis? Okay, so I guess that would be that's kind of a principle out there, and yet another question for Ed. Or let's call it the proponents. It's another question for the proponent.
Yeah, we're going to need that money broken down for the purposes of discussing it with the financial department, with Dave Davidson.
Okay. All right, so we have some questions for Ed. We're kind of optimistic. I don't want us to be embarrassed, because all those questions come back on us. Okay. And we don't want to deal with them. We want to ask the last question first. We want to answer every single question here so that we're ready when we go to town meeting. Okay. All right. We done? Okay. Let's move on to FY 2208 trail identification, professional design services. It's another relatively small amount, and we've examined pretty closely. Does anybody have any? Oh, that's that's my responsibility. Does anybody have any questions, comments, hesitation with respect to that? If you recall, it was to put together the design work for identifying trails, redesigning or examining kiosks, and putting together maps, and perhaps even maybe leading to something like an all trails online or online available map system. So, questions? No. Generally supportive?
Yep.
No hesitations? Great.
No.
Okay, now we're on to Walker Pond improvements. That's 2209. And so first we'll turn to the liaisons of the project. That would be Rick Zambone and Laura Dorfman. And do you have any comments or questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just to
Updates.
kind of tee up this project, Laura and I had some discussions earlier, and we talked about this a little bit. The crux to this issue, I think everybody, at least I haven't heard any sentiments otherwise, think that this is an extremely worthwhile project, that it needs to be done. It clearly, we received some pictures which weren't forwarded to the group, but they were historical pictures of what this pond looked like, and I believe they were forwarded to Tony for his presentation next week at the in 2 weeks at the public hearing. So I think there's a true justification to having this work done. The problem arises in that if you take a look at the project, this phase of the project is for pre-treatment going into the pond. And it's exclusively for pre-treatment. The next phase, $350,000 worth, is for actual treatment of the pond. The raking, the putting up some stop gates. You know, it's a very thought out, as you're looking down the road, solution to the problem. And so as we're taking a look at this, and I was trying to get, for the benefit of the committee, our hands around the whole concept of pre-treatment as it comes into a pond. And so I spent an hour or so going through the community preservation group's website, and I went through their database. And if you go through the database, I went through and looked at all of the recreation and open space projects that have been done over the last 3 years in every town in the state. And I was looking for a project that had some pre-treatment associated with any aspect to a pond, treatment of a pond, approach to a pond, things like that. I couldn't find one that really addressed this issue. I did find one that you could argue is tangential to this, and I believe it was in Randolph or one of those communities where they actually were looking to expand a pond on a golf course, and they were going to use the water in that pond as irrigation water for the golf course. It's a town-owned golf course, and they were going to do some pre-treatment of stormwater runoff before it got to this pond, and they used it for irrigation. So that's the only reference where I saw any of the money being used for that purpose. And then the other thing was, and I'll let Joe talk about it. Joe was going to be talking with, at least he planned to talk with Stuart Signator, is it?
Saganor.
Signator. And so Joe talked to him, and he asked him, I guess my request, he was asking him about this. And Joe, why don't you share his comments?
Well, he shared with me something of what you've just said, Rick, that infrastructure projects, part of a project that is infrastructure should be stayed clear of. That is not the intention of CPA funds. Some towns have tried it in the past, and town meeting has pretty much gone wild, and they have threatened to remove CPC from their town agenda. He said you're walking on very thin ice once you overstep your bounds and start to get into treatment of water prior to, for example, the sediment in the reservoir, or in this case, the Walker Pond that Rick's referring to. So he was pretty clear with me that there is a line that has to be drawn, and the line is drawn between what is actual CPC jurisdiction and funding possibilities and what is not. And he said that the treatment of water and that type of thing was certainly not part of it.
So I appreciate that, Joe, and thank you for following up. But it brings us to the, kind of the crux of the issue here, and also to a degree on the reservoir. This is clearly a project, and it's unfortunate that we're at this stage and we're discussing this, because it's really important for the project that the pretreatment get funded somewhere, somehow, from some source. And if it can't be from us, it perhaps should come from some aspect of the town's budget. And I think we need to, as you say, if we're going to put a stake in the ground and let the powers to be know, particularly as we're looking at this, because the project should go forward. I don't think there's anybody here that disagrees with that. It's just a question of how it's funded. And perhaps it shouldn't be funded by CPA funds based on what we're doing here. So I'll drop that out and stop talking. Unless, Laura, do you have anything else you want to chime in with on this?
No, just that in my research, and it's not been that extensive, Newton with Bullows Pond, Arlington with the reservoir, some of these other places have gotten funding from the DEP. Some of them have created 401c, am I saying this right? Nonprofits to collect, to raise, thank you, to raise funds for this. I'm not sure that, I know Walker Pond is, it's just Walker Lane and there's only a few people, but I mean, if it's such a benefit to the community, as is attested in the proponents, write-up, then I just kind of wonder, and I know I feel bad because we looked at this last year, and I said to Rick, I wish we thought of these things last year, but there's other funding sources, and why are we just the first one they're going to? They acknowledged on a call with Rick and me that they kind of sort of looked online but didn't really find anything, and there's other things that can be done. So
we also remember we use CPC funds, we look for leverage, other funding sources. That's always a plus on the subjective factors when we talk about funding projects. And so that's kind of what you're saying, Laura. And it's also, and in this instance, yeah, there could be other sources, I don't know. But that is one of those principles of CPC. Let me advance the project to the next phase so that we kind of get a sense of the committee, if you will. There's if we're able to intelligently address that, which is what happens at the next phase, and is that something, if we're not going to do anything that's subsurface or anything that's before the water's edge, what is it that from the liaison's perspective, phase 2, is there some part of that project that would be that you would support, or do you see as a CPC fund potentially?
Yeah,
CPC.
Definitely. Water quality, right, Rick? I mean, all these projects he's talking about, that we see online. It's all about water quality and water treatment. It's not about what happens before the water gets into the body of water.
I think that I would agree. I think the next phase is clearly within our jurisdiction. You can go and find multiple projects where they've gone in and I don't know what you call it, rake out the invasive species or the all of that stuff. They've done treatments. One town, and I forget which one, actually went out and bought a raker itself to address all, Rentham it was, to address all the ponds in town. And so this is clearly, the next scope of work, I think, clearly falls under our jurisdiction. The only thing that may or may not, and I didn't look at it in detail, but ongoing testing for multiple years. I don't know if that falls under our purview, but for the most part, the things that they talked about are definitely under our jurisdiction.
I would say that ongoing testing was one of those things that jumped out at me as perhaps something that we might not be, that we haven't funded in the past and may not be amenable to funding in the future. But I'm going to go to the rest of the panel. I'm sorry I jumped in, but I want to just add one thing, which is I know we, as liaisons, we become kind of advocates, if you will, of the proponents, and that's good because we're good citizens. That's why we're here, and so you end up developing a relationship with these proponents, and that's great. That's why we go through this, but we also go through the due diligence process in order to make sure that we arrive at the right decision for everybody else. So, we have to make some calls, and so, but I would. And you could not have advanced this question any earlier. We are arriving here. This is basically the way government works, and this is basically the way the committee works. We dig in, and then we arrive at some sort of decision. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to go back to I'm going to go back in alphabetical order, if I may. Is that okay? And I won't take up any more airtime. I will yield my time to everyone else. So I'll start with Paula Albert.
Won't take up any airtime either. I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. And Dermody. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, right. I'm sorry. It was Artie Crocker. I'm sorry, Artie. You're next.
Oh, okay.
Well,
One way or another, we only have so much money to spend. And it seems clear that I think we're coming to the consensus that we shouldn't be spending money on the cleanup of water coming into the pond. Well, that just means we'll have money to spend on the other part of the project that we are responsible for. And if we spend money on something we're not, we wouldn't have the money to spend on something we are. So one way or another, we only have so much, and one way or another, that water has to be cleared up. There's no question about that, and the town's going to have to do it. But when the town does it, hopefully it does it in such a way where there's something is done so it doesn't keep getting polluted from other sources. So I'm in line. Thank you.
All right, and Joe, I'm sorry I skipped you. I didn't have my script in front of me, so you're up next.
That's okay. I'm easily forgettable. I will say that I don't have the project in front of me, and maybe it doesn't delineate it anyway. But do we have any idea of the cost of treating the water prior to going into the pond? I mean, we would need to let somebody know, the town or proponents, what kind of money they're talking about here. That we're not going to be able to fund going into phase 2.
If it's okay, Peter, I have the application in front of me, and so the first phase was $125,000, and that included the installation of the manholes, wildflowers, tall grass, and a tree infiltration system, along with educational pamphlets. And I think that's the part where Rick and I are saying, you know what, that's probably not a CPC issue. But after that, once they've done all that and it comes to water quality, and that might be something that makes more sense for us.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Rick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And now we're Bob Dermody.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is an important project. We have to take care of the environment. It's a good project. I just have some concerns I voiced before, but I just want to voice them again about the efficacy of relying on private homeowners a great distance from the pond of participating in this big project. Maybe that's a bigger picture issue than right now, but I want to say it again. And that, and I don't know if this is an issue or what the disposition is or what we as a committee need to know, but about the ownership of the surface area of the pond. Are there private land holdings, I assume, adjacent to the pond, but what is that jurisdiction and does that affect our deliberations in any way? Thank you.
Okay, Laura, do you want to answer that question?
Well, I
Or
just
handle
would
that?
like to add that in terms of I don't know about the waterway rights or whatever they're called, or where the private land crosses into that. But we do know that a lot of the success of this project is based on those I think there's 6 or 7 of those residents hooking up to town sewer, and that's something we can't control. And that's before the water gets into the pond. So that's just something to think about. I think Rick said there was one person whose septic system was failing who had to, but the other 5 or 6, if they don't ever do it, then that's just like a wild card to me in the equation of the treatment.
Thanks for that info, Laura. I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just to respond to Mr. Dermody's question, I believe part of the pond is owned by the private residents, and a portion of it is under the jurisdiction of Park and Rec.
Okay, I'm gonna actually have questions when we finish related to that. So, Karis.
I just wanted to make a note because the proponents had sent it to me. I don't recall if I'd sent it to everyone. But the town is installing sewer on Walker Lane as part of an appropriation that was approved at the fall special town meeting this spring. And they did send me the signed petition for the addition of the sewer, signed by all of the residents. So the town pays for the running of the sewer, and there's a betterment process, and then they connect to the sewer individually.
But they still have to opt to connect.
Yes, but they'll be paying a betterment on it either way. So there's an incentive for them to connect.
Okay. Okay. Oh, that's how it works. Okay, great. That's very helpful too. Okay. All right, Chris Gersel.
No questions at this time, but I think this is a worthy project to push through.
Okay. Penny Kirk.
Yeah, well, I understand the 2 phases. I hadn't known about that. I think that it's, it looks like we'll certainly be able to look carefully at phase 2, and that phase 1 has got to take place somehow. So it's good that we recognize that we're not involved with that, but these people will have to find the funding some other way. So I understand it.
Okay. Rick, do you have any further comments?
No, Mr. Chair, but in just one, in fairness to the proponents, I think it's incumbent upon us to follow up with the town and Tony's going to be making the presentation. So I think, if you don't mind, through you to Karis to Tony, that we address that funding source issue. And just so that I would hate to see this thing die again for another year. So I think we need to look at what we can do elsewhere.
Okay.
I may ask a question because I know they're finalizing the language on the warrant, but I believe all the articles are set. Is that this article is going to appear under the community preservation heading. So I guess my question back is there any portion of this project that the CPC is likely to fund if taking away CPC funding no longer makes it eligible for the warrant?
Oh. So we can put, I don't want to, if I say the word nominal, is that bad to put on the record? But if we put a nominal amount in, we get to keep our placeholder.
We've had items before under the CPC category that have had mixed funding, right? So I think a good example would be the Memorial Park Fieldhouse. Only $500,000 came out of CPC. The remainder came out of the general fund. And that was under our heading as far as the organization of the warrant.
All right, I don't know that we need to decide that tonight but that's kind of a procedural. But are you also saying that if we preserve the warrant, or if it's on the warrant and stays on the warrant, that the town would find another funding source for this initial phase?
I need to find out if that's possible, given the phase that we're in of finalizing town meeting. That's what I'm not certain of, so I will get clarity on that.
Otherwise, I would say that's what we need to find out first. Otherwise, they're just gonna have to start over, either through special town meeting or the next town meeting, right? I don't want to speak for the committee, and let's hear from Rick Savone, who has his hand up.
Yeah, just an opinion on that, and maybe we could pursue it this way. I agree. If our approach would be to withdraw the article because we're not funding it, we're not sponsoring it. We could fund it to a nominal amount. For example, we could pay for the brochures and pamphlets that they're looking to put together for the purpose of the project. It's a nominal amount of money, and then the bulk of the money, Karis could go back and talk to the town manager and the finance director, and maybe they get it out of the town's free cash money, or maybe it comes out of one of the other buckets that they have available to the town to pay for this. And that way we retain it on it keeps its place on the warrant article. It's under ours, but we're only paying a small percentage of the project cost. But that has to be an agreement between, I think you as the chair and the town.
Okay, so let's do this. Do we have a sense of the committee that is, so there are open questions. We don't know if the money is available. We seem to have arrived at a spot where we don't feel comfortable funding this for the most part. There could be a small slice that we could fund. I'm freezing up here, sorry. If you could still hear me, I'll come back. And hopefully my face doesn't permanently freeze in that position at some point. So we'll, the sense of the committee, does that make sense to the committee?
Yes.
Feel comfortable with that?
Yes.
Okay. I think maybe we'll follow the usual format, but I'm going to make it a much shorter note, maybe even an email, just so we're clear and it can come from the committee. Does that make sense to you, Karis? Because you got plenty to do anyway. Okay. Okay. Any further comments? All right. Great. Now we are moving on to FY 22-10 Reservoir, Town Reservoir Sediment Removal.
Okay, that's me and Penny. Penny, would you mind if I got started on this? Is that a nod saying you mind or a nod saying go ahead?
I said, please do. Sorry.
Okay. So, I'm going to take up some time, folks, on this one. Peter was very kind to put together the due diligence questions, which were sent to Tony on February 18th. And a couple of days ago, maybe yesterday, I realized that we had a meeting coming up and we hadn't heard from Tony. And so I asked Karis to give Tony a little push. The word I used was nudge. Nudge with a Jewish accent. And so we got responses from Tony late this afternoon. And Karis sent those to you. I don't know if you've had a chance to see them, but I was able to go through his responses, and his responses were extremely brief, but they were telling. They were very telling in what he said and what he didn't say. So to go through it quickly, on the first 4 questions that Peter had, Tony's response was, see the letter from Beta. He also referred to a map, but I'm going to ignore the map. I don't think we need to talk about that. But for the first 4 questions, it was C, the response from Beta. So I took a look at the letter from Beta, and the first 4 questions was, give us a detail for where you got to 262,000. So the response from Beta had a number of 175,000. And I went through the Beta letter and took a look at what they were doing, and the numbers didn't quite add up. They added up to 162.5, and then they had a bottom line of 175, and I went, okay, so they got to it and they rounded up to 175. So I'm fine with that, but that doesn't explain 262. What's the scope of the work? See the letter from Beta. The letter from Beta gives a very sketchy list of the work that they're going to do, but it's something of a list. And then I took a closer look at it and I realized at the very beginning of the letter, it says, you have asked us, let me get the letter again. As requested, Beta has reviewed the previously provided estimate design budget for removing sediment from a portion of the reservoir. As requested, Beta has provided a preliminary scope and estimated budget. So this 175,000 is what actually we're looking for, which is the budget for the design for the removal of the sediment at the reservoir. Tony bumped it up to 262. In my opinion, I'm going to couch this so that I'm not saying anything derogatory about Tony. In my opinion, he was bumping it up to give us the money to do the funding for the water coming into the reservoir and the piping that's coming into the reservoir, which was what we've been discussing about. Maybe that's not covered by CPC. Question 3, are there any documents detailing the scope? See the letter from Beta. Didn't answer the question. Provide a detailed description of the geographical area. Well, the letter from Beta doesn't discuss it, and the geographical area on the map is like half the town. So then we get to Peter's question: what percentage of the requested funds will be used for the inputs to the reservoir? And Tony said 33%, $87,000. Well, if you take the 175 that Beta is estimating, and you take the 87,000 that Tony is saying is for the inputs, that adds up to 262. So to me, that's where Tony got his 262. Beta's estimate for doing this, the reservoir plus another 87,000 for the inputs. Then the question was, how much of the estimate of 2,070,000 for the project itself is for the sediment of the reservoir? And he basically said, and Tony's answer is basically the entire thing. It's only for dredging the reservoir. Hopefully, as Tony explained to us when he was in front of us, that's his highest number. That's the worst case scenario that Tony sees. He's very hopeful, we can't guarantee it, that we can clean the reservoir for a lot less money if, for example, if all we have to do is remove the sandbar instead of doing all the dredging that 2,070,000 would do. He cannot give us a cost for just removing the sandbar at this time. He said we need to get the design funds first. So I think that's a brief description of my interpretation of Tony's letter. What I'm hearing is 175,000 for the design funds for cleaning the reservoir. Tony threw in another 87,000 for the inputs. And I'm thinking, based on our prior discussions, that what we want to fund is 175,000. That's my summary. And because this came in so late, Penny and I have not had a chance to confer. So you've just heard my analysis, and if Penny has anything to add, as my co-liaison.
No, I look at it the same way.
Great.
And I can see that based on what we've talked about with the Walker Pond thing, we're gonna have to look at the inputs in a different way.
Mr. Chair, I think I'm done with my presentation.
Okay, thank you. All right, so now we'll go in alphabetical order. But we've already heard from Mr. Alpert, so let's go to Mr. Barnes.
Thank you, Paul. I go back to some of the things that we've talked about for McLeod. I think we're talking about an infrastructure issue here that is not under our jurisdiction. I think the sediment, we know the cause of the sediment. I think getting to the source of that problem is not going to be under our jurisdiction, and I would hope that we would agree on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Okay. Artie Crocker. Artie, you're on.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I think everything's pretty well covered, and we're coming to the consensus that we're not putting our funds to treating water coming into something. I'm not sure what else there is to say right now. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Artie. And Bob Dermody.
I concur with Mr. Crocker. Thank you.
Okay, Laura Dorfman.
I agree, and good for you, Paul. That was, I think that was a really good catch. And it's important.
Chris, now, but also I just want to be fair to Tony, which is that he did talk openly about the fact that the project involved design work and it was going to involve inputs. Okay, so we did manage, but it's an example of asking questions and being persistent and then turning every page, reading the document, and then coming back to us and explaining what the document says is very helpful. Okay, thank you, Paul. Okay, Chris Gerstle.
No questions at this time, but Paul, great job.
Okay, and Penny Kirk.
Paul, you said that was going to be long and it wasn't, and congratulations. And it was a very good presentation, and I agree with you.
And Rick Simbo.
Yeah, I agree, Paul. Appreciate the clarification. I think it was well done. I agree with it. And by the way, that drawing of half the town, that's the sources of all the water that flows into the reservoir. That whole area just flows right into the reservoir. So that's what that is.
So I have a couple questions. I thought that somehow or another I misplaced the 10-9-20 letter, but you've looked at that, Paul, right? That's what you're referencing, because there's another document that you didn't reference, and that is the 3-1-21 beta document. The 3-1-21 beta documents, it's not particularly helpful, but because what it does is it provides a specific breakdown of what the $87,000 consists of. Okay. So, but my recollection is that
Peter, the October 9th letter is attached, not as an attachment, but in the body of the email that Kara sent to us this afternoon.
Okay.
So if you find that email, you'll see the October 9, 2020 letter.
Okay. So my question is, yeah, actually I did read that. So I have an overall question. Actually, I remember now looking at that. I did read it, and it all sounded like design work related to whether or not to the potential dredging of the reservoir. But it looked to me like it was more than just removing the sandbar, which was Tony's hope and aspiration. And it looked like it was actually, this is the design work for doing a dredge of the reservoir. But
well, that's what Tony is asking for, because he's anticipating that they may need to spend $2,070,000.
Okay, so I'm just trying to figure out how this works. How does this work? He comes to us and he asks us for this amount. We've sussed it out. We figured out that the inputs are $87,000. the design work for potential full dredge of the reservoir is the balance of that, which is whatever you're, what was it?
175.
175. But are they going to, how do they end up using that money if he spends the money addressing inputs? Why do you design a full dredge of a reservoir when your hope and aspiration is that you don't dredge the reservoir?
Because, well, part of the design, from what Tony explained to us, is that part of this money is to determine the scope of the work that needs to be done. They don't know yet how much of the reservoir needs to be dredged. It could be as little as just the sandbar, or it could be as much as the entire reservoir.
All right, now, yeah,
That's
now,
what they need to determine by doing the design work.
okay, yeah, now my recollection is being refreshed about what that letter said. Okay, because it had to do with you were doing a whole survey of the reservoir, what's underneath and all that kind of stuff. All right, I get it. But I guess my last comment on it is it's still significantly more than Rosemary Pond. And so that's still, why is that? Do we have any sense of why that is?
Refresh my memory, Karis, if you can. How much was the design fund for Rosemary?
If you hold on 1 second, I can look it up. The design was 118,000.
I mean, it's not really, I mean, I guess it's not really our lane to sit here and micromanage the proposal.
But I will indicate Rosemary is a unique situation because we can physically drain it. We
Okay.
don't have that capacity at the reservoir.
Okay. All right. Good. All right, Penny.
Plus, the reservoir has a lot of plant life, which Rosemary really doesn't have. It's probably because you can drain it and keep up with that. But there's a lot of, what are they called? They're very beautiful flowers that are growing, and they can take over the whole pond and make it into a swamp.
Water lilies.
Water lilies. yeah.
Okay. All right. But actually, in a way, it's not kind of our hunt. If it's like he defines the scope of the work and the scope of the work fits within us, within our purview, right? It's fundable. We can make a decision about funding the full amount or not based on economics or otherwise. But really, it's not our job to say, quibble, if you will, about line items, right? That's you, right, Paul?
Right.
Getting back to your earlier comments.
Yes, I agree. But to be fair to Tony, I'm a firm believer in the philosophy of if you don't ask, you don't get. So I will not fault him for asking for the 262.
I want that to be clear to him, and that's fine. Because we're all mature adults and we know what our responsibilities are. It's
Speak for
kind of come
yourself.
with it. What's that?
I said, speak for yourself.
Okay, but now it's come into focus, and so that's not a problem at all. Okay. All right. So now, is it a sense of the committee that we will not be funding the 87,000 portion of that request? Is that pretty much a sense of the committee?
If you want to go in order, that's.
I'll go in order.
I am.
Albert.
That's where I am.
Okay, and Barnes.
I agree.
Crocker. Yes, all right, Bob Dermody.
I agree.
Okay, Laura Dorfman.
I agree.
Okay, Chris Gersel.
Yay.
Okay, and Penny Kirk.
Yes.
Okay, and Zimbo.
I agree.
Okay, and the chair agrees as well. Okay, so that may be another paragraph in the email to Tony, right? All right, now FY 2211 is a placeholder, and we will skip that. And now we're on to FY 2212, and this is increase affordable housing bucket contribution. The floor is yours to the task force, and that is Rick Zambone, Laura Dorfman, and Joe Barnes. Before we
Bob
get
Dermody.
started, thank you for moving with such haste. We appreciate it.
Bob Dermody.
Mr. Chair, don't forget.
Oh, I'm Bob
Mr.
Dermody.
Chairman.
I apologize. Okay.
Story of my life, Peter.
They were, honestly, we talked about this at the last meeting, and they all volunteered to help pull this information together. And I think it was really, without that, we wouldn't be where we are. So let's, if you don't mind, Karis, can you put up the slide presentation? Okay, this is, this will come under the warrant article. It's our very last warrant article where we talk about allocating money to the buckets going forward. So that's really where this topic comes into play. And if you go to the next slide, Karis, please. Bob Dermody was kind enough to pull together this slide, redo it after making some modifications to it. And this kind of shows where we've spent money as a CPC since the initiation of the project. And 59% of the money, which is down here, I put my arrow on, I don't know if you can see that, I can see it, but anyways, 59% of the money has gone to either open space or recreation. 37%, and a good bulk of that, by the way, is obviously Rosemary Pond, a pool. And then you've got the historic bucket, which takes up 37% of that, and a good portion of that, nearly 50% of that 37% is for the town hall. So you can see that where we, in our housing bucket, it's been less than 5%. And it creates a little bit of an issue as we go back through time. And partly because a lot of this stuff, if you take a look at the most recent years, in 2019, we authorized $150,000, and that was for the Housing Authority to do a study on how they wanted to spend the money and where they were going to get the money from. And in 2020, that's the $120,000 we authorized for the rental assistance program. And Mr. Chair, I don't know if you had planned on mentioning this, but we heard the other day that 100,000 of that is going to be coming back to us.
So, yeah, can I actually, this is a good spot. I'll just briefly, I should have put this in the chairman's updates, which is, we're gonna I just attended the meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust, and there are two things that I'll just note really quickly. One is that with respect to the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, the ERAP, they gave a report, staff gave a report regarding outreach efforts. And what is important for you to know is that Metro West provided an update dated February 18th, 2021. They had a total of 35 applications. 17 are enrolled, 4 are unresponsive, 10 are incomplete, 2 have withdrawn, 1 was ineligible, 1 eligible household moved out of Needham. They gave some other details about the demographics of it, but what they had was they were not oversubscribed or over enrolled, but those who did qualify and who applied and did qualify were very much in need. And they moved to extend the funding from 90 days to 6 months, assuming that there weren't going to be significantly more applications. And based on those projections, they would end up spending down the full amount in a 6-month period. The trust was of the opinion that fit within the scope of both the CPC funding and their right as a trust. It's not, the good news on that is, well, first of all, we managed to launch a successful program that's going to help with a number of families. And under under the prior COVID bill in the prior congressional session, we will ERAP programs are going to get dollar for dollar reimbursed. So we're going to eventually get all that money back into the town, and then that money will wind its way back into the CPC. So we spent 120. We helped families The Fed stepped in and basically backed us up on it. And now the money is going to wind itself back into our funds eventually. I think that's a good way of representing it. That's kind of, I should have put that into the chairman's update. And thanks for bringing it up at this time. Is that good, Karis? Does that make sense? Okay, good. And all right, sorry about that. Sorry for the digression. But
Peter,
thanks, Rick. Okay. Yeah,
Peter,
Paul.
is that anticipated as being part of the current bill that's in front of Congress, or has that already been voted in the prior bill?
My firm understanding is that was our second COVID bill that was passed in the prior congressional session. Not in the anticipated session. Not in the anticipated bill.
Great. Thank you.
Peter, can I ask, is it all 120 that's coming back, or is the 20,000 for administrative costs that's not being reimbursed?
It's going to be less, there's going to be some administrative deductions.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Yep.
Yeah, good point. Good question.
And real quickly, if I may, Mr. Chair, to which bucket will it go?
Well, it's going to go back to the buckets that we drew it from.
And must it remain there?
Mr. Chair,
Oh,
if I
okay,
might,
go ahead, Rick.
yeah, it flows just like any funds that come into the town like that. It flows initially into free cash. And then what happens is the state certifies it and it will wind up flowing from free cash into the general reserve bucket.
So then we reallocate it. So, okay, that's interesting. Good point. Thank you for covering for me on that.
Thanks.
Okay.
Well set?
Yep, go.
Next slide, please, Karis. Okay, so, and this kind of, folks, as I'm going through this, this is probably what we're going to talk about at the public hearing. So please feel free to comment, editorialize. If you have any questions afterwards, let me know. Historically, the CPA process has been kind of a one-year outlook. We do kind of look ahead, but basically we take the applications that are processed annually as we receive them. We look first at review the eligibility for funding under the CPA, and then we either fully, partially, or not at all fund the amount requested. What we're proposing here is kind of a little bit of a change in that structure. And moving forward, we're going to be looking a little bit more towards planning for the future, projecting out a little bit with more definition, 3 to 5 years, identifying some priorities and earmarking funds for future use. And someone may ask, well, what prompted this? And it was really kind of the realization that if we funded the Emery Grover to the full extent, we would not have any money for any of these other projects other than what we receive in state match every year, well, for the most part. So that's one of the reasons why we felt we needed to look more towards the future and look what else is out there. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is just a follow-up. Historically, we've always allocated the minimum amounts to each of the reserve categories. The minimum is on 10%. We always do 11. We've historically done 11. We do up to 5% into the administrative fund, and that's been fixed for a number of years now at $82,000 per year. And then the balance goes into the general fund reserve. Moving forward, under this proposal, we'd be looking to increase the community housing reserve contribution to the bucket and raise that to 22%, or roughly double the others. And then the rest of it would remain the same. Next slide, please. So this is the current status as of the end of last year. How much money are in each of the reserve accounts? Community housing reserve was just under 2.5 million. The historic resource reserve is 15,000. That's a minimum amount that goes in there. It stays there every year because all of the money that would typically go into the historic resource reserve bucket goes to pay for the town hall. Open space and recreation reserve was 1.6 million. I think that matches up with the number we talked about earlier. And then the general reserve fund now has 652,000. And there's also this CPA undesignated fund balance, which is the free cash. That's 1.3 million. That's pretty high. That will eventually, that's what we were talking about earlier. If it's not appropriated for projects, for use on projects between now at town meeting, then any of that money that's left over at the end of this fiscal year will be certified and flowed through to the housing reserve. But we can use it as a source of funding going forward. And so just by way of approximate amounts, 11% would be around 350,000 going into the community housing reserve bucket. If we were to double that to 22%, it would be 700,000. So that 2.459 would grow, or 2.46 would grow by roughly 700,000. So it would go into next year, it would be 3.1. And if we were to continue it, that 350,000 a year grows a little bit each year. So the following year, it might be 360 doubled to 720. And it goes up 10, 15, 20,000 each year going out through time. So that just to give you a sense as to how that bucket would increase with just this type of an approach. Next slide, please. So taking a look at the town's 5-year capital plan, there are no housing projects specified in the plan over the next 5 years. So with that as a base, Bob Dermody and I met with the Housing Authority. No, excuse me. This is the housing. No, I'm sorry. I'm a slide ahead of myself. Laura Dorfman, first of all, Joe Barnes did some work in looking at their database for the Housing Authority, and we'll get to some of his work later. But Laura Dorfman talked to Reg Foster the other day, and then I followed up with a conversation with him earlier this morning to talk about the plans from the Housing Authority's perspective. And just by way of background, we funded $150,000 to the Housing Authority for a consultant to work and identify the funding and the development of affordable housing projects going out through time. Apparently that was that work was suspended because of COVID, but the Housing Authority is putting a reg is starting to ramp up on that now. The Housing Authority itself owns and manages approximately, for those who don't know, 300 units of federal and state subsidized affordable housing units. And the objective is to provide decent, safe, and affordable housing for low to moderate income families and individuals. So we talked a little bit, and there's a 2019 plan that the Housing Authority had put together, which talks about future capital projects and future plans moving forward. And among those projects, there's approximately $4 million identified, 4+ million, it's actually 4.5. And three of the bigger projects is to construct a new senior apartment complex up on Captain Robert Cook Seabed Way. And that would be, there's about 10 acres of land up there that they can develop and turn into a new senior apartments. And then there were also projects in line to do the High Rock Estates redevelopment and the Linden Chambers redevelopment. Now, one of the jobs of the consultant that they're hiring is to identify sources of funds to pay for these projects. We are not going to fund all of this. As a matter of fact, the cost for those projects are probably 3 or 4 times that $4 million. It's not a small project. Might even be more than that. And we, in order to get some funding from the federal and the state government, they have to get a commitment of funds from the town. And generally that takes the form of a CPA investment. So we're looking at, over the next 3 to 5 years, at least the start and maybe the continuation of projects. They're going to be at least $4.5 million. But that's not identified. None of those projects are identified in our capital plan. So that begs for us to look at putting aside or setting aside, earmarking some funds so that we have the funds available when it becomes time to do these projects. And that's really kind of the reason why I think we're on the track we are. Next slide. And this one is the Affordable Housing Trust. And this is the one where Bob Dermody and I attended a meeting by Zoom with Kate Fitzpatrick, Kate King, who else was there? Karen Sonnenberg, and who was the fourth, Bob, do you remember?
I think that was just it. It was the three, the Karen, Katie, Kate, and you and I.
Oh, no, Lee Newman.
Lee Newman, sorry. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. And basically the Housing Trust was created in 2017 by town meeting, and it was approved then. Its objective is to provide for the preservation and creation of affordable housing for low and moderate income residents. The difference between the trust and the Housing Authority is the Housing Authority deals with federal and state funded projects. The Housing Trust doesn't necessarily, they don't deal with that at all. It's just some of the projects that have affordable housing in town that have been identified as affordable housing, and they deal with those units. They developed obviously a good partnership with Metro West Housing Development, and they were the ones that we dealt with on the rental assistance program. We talked to them about some of the projects that they would see, and they were looking at potentially a partnership down the road. None of these are firm, and it has to be, these projects have to be ferreted out, but they could conceivably see some partnership developing to do some subsidized elderly and low-income rental units. And then also what some other towns have done, and they've talked about, is to provide some buy-down assistance in the way of down payments and closing costs for folks to be able to afford housing in this town. We all know how expensive it is. And so the purpose would be to set aside money to do that. That's just one of a number, those are just two of a number of projects that they're talking about that they could do. And they've got to generate some of these ideas. So again, there's nothing, they have nothing in the 5-year capital plan. So all the more reason to us to start to earmark some money for housing in town. So next slide, please. So this, Joe Barnes was very helpful. He went into the database that I referred to earlier, and we pulled out some projects. You know, we're not the first ones to do this. Quite honestly, the towns of the cities of Cambridge and Somerville allocate up to 80% each year of their CPA money into the housing reserve buckets because their focus is on housing. The town of Bourne does it. They allocate 70 to 80% for open space because they value open space in their town, and they feel that they want to dedicate a lot of their money to purchasing and maintaining the natural environment that they have down there. They don't want it developed. So, but what Joe did is Joe went through and found a number of projects in there. And, you know, to give you an example, he tried to find some towns that were very similar to Needham. Belmont, for example, they've set aside funds for the Housing Trust to act on certain opportunities. And some towns, by the way, and I think this came to Paul's question at one point in time, some towns actually do just turn the money over to the Housing Trust and let them do it. But you, in order to do that, you're required to sign a trust agreement with the Housing Trust, the CPA committee. So it gets a little bit involved and gets a little tangled. I don't think that's the direction we want to go here. Concord, they put funds in a reserve, additional funds in a housing reserve fund for future projects. And they also contributed to the construction of an 83-unit assisted living facility. Lexington developed community housing on one of their sites up there. They also funded a restoration of some of their Lexington Housing Assistance Board units. I'm going to turn the page, thanks. Sudbury did funds for the acquisition and creation of community housing. And just to show you how extensive Cambridge goes, and they had, quite a few projects, but they acquired a site for development of affordable housing. They created 23 new affordable rental housing units with their funds. And they provided direct funding for eligible first-time home buyers to assist in their purchase of homes. And then Duxbury, they funded the Affordable Housing Trust to be used for first-time homeowners assistance program. They subsidize the development and design construction for moderate, low and moderate income housing. And they also funded the restoration and preserved some elderly and disabled housing in the town. So range of towns, similar affluence as us, who utilize the reserve bucket to a greater degree than we have historically. And then the next slide is just the slide as it would appear in the warrant article, and it would be to vote to appropriate, and that's how it's listed in the warrant article. We break it down. There's 82,000, and then the to be determined has to depend on us and how we want to what projects we authorize and fund this year. So that's kind of that number is calculated and put on the warrant at the very end. So that's basically it. Questions, comments, Mr. Chair? Here, you're muted.
You me, Peter.
Sorry about that.
But also your mic was off.
Okay, sorry. Well, thank you, Rick. What I'd like to do is turn to your cohorts and see if each of them have anything to add. So we'll start first with Mr. Barnes. Joe.
I think Rick did a great job of explaining exactly what the study was all about. I think that more than anything that I came away with was the variety and the wide expanse of opportunities that different towns have taken to provide for those with low and middle income families. First-time home buyers, renovation, they're creative in so many ways to help those who cannot necessarily do it all themselves. So I think that there are opportunities to partner with a number of towns to get ideas as to how they were able to do what they did. I think it's a good start and a great resource available to us.
Great. Okay, Mr. Dermy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Rick summed up our efforts well, I think. I'll just share my sort of takeaways from the meeting that we had with learning about the town's aspects. This is not my milieu, but I did learn a lot from the meeting, and that they were very receptive to this. I got the sense, and they said that one of the challenges is that you need to cobble together funds to do these kind of projects, a little from here, a little from there. So I think they were receptive to that. And, there's lots of different ways the money can be used, even if we don't have a line item right now in the town 5-year plan. So they seemed interested. They were ready, willing, and able to meet with us. They had lots of ideas. So I just thought I'd share that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And Laura Dorfman.
So I agree. Thanks, Rick, for getting us on this. I have a colleague who's on the housing authority for the town of Arlington. Got a lot of information from him. Their director would be happy to talk to anybody that we want to refer to them. I think that my sense, I was on a housing authority meeting. I've been trying to be on some meetings. So look, I think there needs to be some support and encouragement for these initiatives, to some empowerment for these groups to realize that there's funds available and to feel supported in their requests, because there's a lot going on in other places, and I feel like we can do it here. And as we all know, I mean, the housing prices are out of reach. They just are out of reach for someone who's not of low income, and there aren't enough low income units. So I'm in support of this to the, in any way, and I'll do anything I can to further it. And work with either the Housing Authority or the Housing Trust or whatever organization, would be interested.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, so now we'll return and go in alphabetical order. Okay, starting with Paul Albert.
Rick, that was a fabulous presentation and it's a great PowerPoint. Thank you very much. I would just add, when you're making a presentation at the public hearing and then again on the floor of town meeting, something that we've discussed before, which is that because of its separate legal status, when we're funding things for the Needham Housing Authority, unlike Rosemary and unlike Town Hall, we cannot bond it, we cannot borrow. So if we don't have the money set aside, we can't help the Needham Housing Authority fund their projects.
That's a very good point. Thanks, Paul.
All right, good point. Okay, Artie Crocker.
Like everyone else is saying, job well done. And we're doing something that's clearly falls under some responsibility that we can take up for society. So I'm all for it. Good job.
You skipped Joe.
I did. No, Joe's already spoken. Joe Barnes?
Oh, you did, Joe? I missed that. Sorry.
Yeah, he was one of the cohorts.
Yeah, Joe was on the team.
Okay. All right, so, okay, so now Chris Gerson.
No comments at the time. I think everyone's, got the same mentality about this. Rick, job on that presentation. I'll take it. But no, great job all around, everybody. So great job putting it together.
It's not a problem. I'll be more than happy to step down.
Okay.
Oh, we still want Rick.
Penny, Kirk.
Oh, great presentation, really. I thought it was terrific. I want to add that I had a conversation with my niece yesterday, who's recently moved to Concord. She's a retired executive with Merck, and she has a preliminary report. She's gotten very interested in the housing thing, which she showed me yesterday. It's fantastic. She's looked across the state. She's identified funding sources, and the Boston Foundation does a report card of all the towns in the state. When she finishes, she has a draft now. When she finishes it, I'll be presenting it to the Needham Housing Board and probably the Equal Justice Needham group. At some point, this group may want to see it. It brings all the facts together across the state, and it's will just help us all find the money we want.
Okay. Look forward to that. Okay, I have a question, and all right, the hand up, Joe Barnes.
Yeah, quick question. If the committee decides to make the move and double the percentage going into the housing authority bucket, or the housing bucket, do we have the autonomy to make that move, or is this something that has to go to town meeting?
So that will be part of our finance article. So Karis, we can address that, but yes, we need to have approval by town meeting. Town meeting approves the allocations each year.
Right. Thank
So
you.
in our CPC plan, it says that it's a minimum of 10%. It doesn't put a top dollar on it. So it's in line with the CPC plan. And yes, it's an article that we then submit to town meeting for approval.
Thank you, Karis.
And we probably would have, the chair usually does the finance article, and it's probably going to be part of the finance article, but because of, people may confuse me with the housing authority, and so we'll probably have someone else present the finance article, because we have this, we're careful not to have someone who's a stakeholder, representative of a stakeholder, actually be a proponent. So that there's kind of a perception thing. So I probably won't present the finance article. We'll figure out.
Okay.
Somebody else on the committee probably could do it better than I could anyway. So we'll figure that out. All right. Any other questions, Joe?
No, that's fine. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So I have one question that I wanted to just clarify, because Joe, you got to take your hand up. Now you got to put your hand down, but you're ahead of me because I can't figure, yeah.
I
Raise your hand.
may have a question again down the road.
Just
But
keep your hand up then.
All right,
It's
I'll
fine.
take it.
Keep your hand up. All right, so can we go back to that first that slide, I don't want, we can't call it the Dermody slide. We'll call it the compilation. Can we have the
Team effort.
compilation?
It was a team effort.
All right, good. Can we have the compilation slide?
And Karis, do I have the bucket names right on that slide? Are they accurate vis-a-vis the article?
So this is something that dawned on me early one morning. So, because somebody's going to look at that and say,
Those are right.
what?
Thank you.
No, back, right there. Okay, so someone's going to say, that doesn't make any sense. You have to allocate 10% a year to housing. So how is it that housing doesn't say 10%? And there are two reasons for that. One is that we haven't included in this allocation grid the amount that we actually moved over and allocated for future use for community housing projects. That is whatever's in the savings account, we haven't included in here. That's number one. And then number two is what we have done is booked all the debt. So if you played all this forward to like 2044, the bottom line has to be housing 10%. It has to be, because that's what it is. But what we've done is we booked in advance the debt. So that's fine. It's totally okay. It's just that I think it probably would become a little more clear if we added in, now I don't know, it's up to you guys actually, because we're going to get a question about it. So we could either have a narrative that says, oh, but it doesn't include the savings. And you should also understand that this is really appropriations. So these are things that are bonded too, but we have committed this amount of money, or maybe we've spent it. I don't know. Maybe the finance people will tell me that the number is it committed or spent? It's spent, right?
No, so I think, Peter, it might be helpful to do a narrative or like a little asterisk on the bottom, just explaining that, because I think in order to make it apples to apples, you would have to add in all of the other buckets.
Yeah.
And then you would have to deduct out what we hadn't paid yet on our bonds.
All right, so we don't want to. So what's an easy, elegant way of doing this?
I like the asterisk.
Yeah, let me just point out, if we've averaged over those 15 years from 6 to 20, if we've averaged, and I'm just going to say roughly $300,000 a year as the 10 or 11% that goes into those buckets, times 15 years, that's 4.5 million. If you take the 1.7 and you add to that what's currently in the reserve account of just under 2.5, that's 4.2 right there. You're almost at, and I'm just doing back of the envelope calculation.
Yeah.
So you're almost at the amount of money that we've set aside in the bucket. We've managed to spend 1.8 and we still have in reserve about 2.5. So the numbers pretty much match up.
I understand that, but it's weighted. The problem is that it's weighted towards payments that are going to be paid in the future, because the allocation, the 16 million for the pool is paid for each year by us paying a bond payment.
So
We didn't
Peter,
pay it all in 1 year.
I can't see because it's my control screen is blocking it. I'm
Okay,
sure there's
but
a way to move it and I can't. Is there anything at the top that I think it's the emphasis is on appropriated?
Yeah, that's
not on allocated. And I
that's-
will also say there is no open space and recreation bucket. There's an open space bucket, and then recreation comes out of general. So I don't know if it makes sense to separate them or not. I think it's just also for clarity on that.
Yeah, we just want to I just want clarity. That's all I want. Because otherwise we get sidelined. It becomes radio static. It's radio static on town floor meeting that we want to avoid.
Yeah, it's not to push back on that, but I thought open space includes recreation. They didn't give it a separate bucket, but when I went on and looked up the definition, And that's why I'm saying this. I thought it said open space includes recreation, because recreation wasn't added until, around 2014 or 2013.
So that can only come out of the general reserve. We can't pull it out of open space.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not sure about that, but can we check on that?
And, I asked the question certainly, but I'm fine with leaving it because where those numbers came from was the spreadsheet Karis sent out. And anything that said a recreation applicant goes in that column. Anything that's an open space project goes in that column. And those were appropriations, Peter, as I understand.
Well, what we could call it, the way I viewed it, this is how in my mind, I viewed it as open space and recreation. And I moved when I first looked at this, I had proposed that we move the 7.2 under general to historic and the 8.0 under general to open space and recreation, because that's the balance of the pool. So we would end up with basically nothing in general. But you know what, it's either way. I mean, it's your chart, but that's how I conceptualized it. I looked at it as open space and recreation was,
okay, that good comment.
But here's the thing, it's accurate. I just want you to be able to be facile with any questions and also anticipate questions that do you want, the sidetracks, radio static, all that kind of stuff. You
Your
want
point is
to
well
minimize
taken.
that.
Simpler is better when you put something on the screen at town
But
hall.
it's pretty simple now. And then I'm not trying to make it more complicated. It may just be maybe one more asterisk or maybe none. Maybe anticipate the question. Maybe no one will ask. That would be good.
Well,
Maybe
I think the focal point here needs to be on the 4% number. And maybe instead of yellow, we make it bold red or something. I mean, it's clear that we've only spent 4% of all of our CPA authorized money in housing.
We've appropriated it. Yeah, we've only appropriated that.
Appropriated.
And also, here's the other thing. We've only appropriated 4% now and in the future of this. Now, but we have some money in the savings account. Maybe that's actually that's why it should be in, because these are appropriations as a snapshot in time, now and in the future. Commitments we've made for now and in the future. I think that's right. But maybe I'm complicating things. My point, of course, is that these are mortgage payments. These are bond payments that we're making on these two major projects that are going out into the 2030s. That's all. That was my only comment.
If I were to have any minor change in this whole thing, it would maybe be open space and recreation. I mean, as a Conservation Commission member, I certainly view them quite differently. So if there was an ampersand in there, perhaps that would at least show some designation of separation of that there are multiple things going on there. Because, I mean, there are plenty of recreational things I don't view as open space.
No, a good point. And
but there's no open
chart as it was labeled either or.
Yeah. So I mean, if we could just maybe put an ampersand there without complicating. I'd rather have them separated, but if it's an ampersand, that'll serve the purpose for this presentation.
Okay.
All right, and then my only other, I think the presentation's great, and you folks really put it together quickly and did a great job. So thank you. Good work. And I think we're beyond that point where the sense of the committee is, we're supportive of this proposal, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, good.
Absolutely.
All right. So I think does anyone have any other comments? Hand is up by Dermody. Dermody's hand's up.
No.
See it?
No, it's down. Not on my screen.
All right, that's kind of odd.
Penny's got a hand.
Oh yeah, that
I get
okay.
a freebie.
Penny, hand up.
I move to adjourn.
No, we're no. Whoa, sorry.
You're not finished?
That
You gotta be kidding me.
Here's your hat, what's your hurry?
we have to approve here's what we're gonna do next. Look at your agenda. We're
Trader
gonna
Joe's
approve
is
prior
closed.
minutes.
Trader Joe's is
Oh, the
closed.
minutes.
All right, let's our prior minute
I have no place
meeting
to
minutes.
go.
Do we have those, Karis?
Yep, they were
They
sent
were
out.
submitted with the agenda, I believe.
Right, okay, so
Here's
let's have a
the
motion.
Minutes.
Okay, that's Zimbone makes the motion to approve
Second.
minutes. That was seconded by Mr. Dermody. We'll take a roll call vote. Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, let's have a vote.
They were wonderfully
Alpert.
written.
Okay, Alpert,
Aye.
Barnes,
Aye.
Crocker,
Aye.
Dermody,
Aye.
Dorfman,
Aye.
Gersel,
Aye.
Kirk,
Aye.
Zimbone.
Aye, and they were extremely well written.
And the chair votes aye and seconds that comment. Okay, next, a motion to adjourn.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I don't believe Ms. Dorfman was at the last meeting.
Who was?
Ms.
Oh,
Dorf-
you're right, Kristen.
Was not.
As I said, another example of voter fraud.
And Laura, you'll be sure to go and watch it though, right, on YouTube?
We're gonna root this out right here.
I'm gonna do it right now, Bob.
Yeah, good luck with that.
We want all votes notarized with a witness.
Yeah. Penny made a motion to adjourn. I second.
Okay, so, all right, Kirk makes the motion, Zimbone seconds it, roll call vote. Alpert,
Aye.
Barnes,
Aye.
Crocker,
Aye.
Dermody,
Aye.
Dorfman,
Aye.
Gersel,
Aye.
Kirk.
Abstain?
No, yours is a close.
I'm
Okay,
kidding. Aye.
Okay, good.
Oh, boy.
Yes.
Zimbone,
Aye, and we'll see you all next at the public hearing, right?
chair votes
Yeah.
aye. Public hearing, let's,
17th.
okay, we'll.
Oh, that's St. Patrick's Day. Sorry,
I
everybody.
know,
Can I
I
just
can't imagine